Hilchos Avodah Zara has been sort of revolving around this point, is that an object of Avodah Zara is Asur Ba'ana, right? It's Asur Ba'ana. And we know that there is one way for something that is Avodah Zara to then become Mutter Ba'ana, is if it goes through the process of Bittul, right? If it was an Avodah Zara that was owned and made by a non-Jew, then it's possible for it to be nullified and to be undone. So there's different ways how to go through the process of Bittul, which is going to be a siman coming up, but one surefire way to do it is if the non-Jew breaks it. Right? If you break it, then you're clearly showing that you don't believe in it anymore, and that will undo the Avodah Zara. So the question, that's for sure happens. Now, there is a discussion in the Shulchan Aruch in terms of what happens if an Avodah Zara just breaks on its own. Do we say that, well, listen, it broke on its own, there's no indication that the owner doesn't believe in it anymore, or you can make the argument that the guy should make the following point. If the Avodah Zara can't protect itself, then clearly it's not divine. So that's a question whether something breaks on its own. Do we assume it's bittul or not? Derech klal, we are machmer, and we assume that if it broke on its own, you still have to be machmer that it's asur ba'ana. Only if it was broken, purposefully, then it will be bittul. The question the Shulchan Aruch is dealing with is that's all in scenarios where you know what happened. The guy broke it, for sure it's bittul. It broke on its own, questionable, you should be machmer. What about if I just find a broken Avodah Zara, and I don't know how it broke? Maybe it broke purposefully, maybe it broke by itself, so I don't know. So that's what the Shulchan Aruch is going to be talking about right now. So it says the Shulchan Aruch like this: Hamleitzi shivrei tzlamim mushlachim, oy b'sech shivrei nechoshes. Let's say I find, I'm walking down the street, and I find a broken, shattered object that definitely was Avodah Zara at some point, but now it's broken. Or I find it amongst other, broken, shattered objects and so on. I find it broken. I feel shivrei alilam atzmam. Again, whether it be a broken statue or a broken Avodah Zara, I know for sure it was Avodah Zara. Mutar, says the Shulchan Aruch, such a thing is mutar. In other words, the way it's explained is because if it's basically like this: if it was broken on purpose, then it's for sure mutar. If it was broken on its own, that itself is a suffix. So you're dealing with a sveka. First of all, maybe it was broken on purpose. Even if it was broken on its own, maybe the halach is that if it's broken on its own, the owner doesn't believe in it anymore. So putting all the svekas together, it's tilted more to the side of heter, and that's the halacha. So if you find a broken Avodah Zara, you can rely on aleph, it was broken purposefully, and even if not, you can rely on those shitas that hold that if it was broken on its own, it's also nullified as an Avodah Zara. So that's the halacha.
Why would it be totally in the owner's das? Why shouldn't it be in the fact of whether it's soakable or not? You know what I mean? Like, let's say somebody owns a Avodah Zara, somebody else comes along and breaks it, and the owner's like, I still believe in that. Yeah. So that would happen.
So then in theory, it would still be, again, that would be no worse than if it broke on its own.
Right.
But let's say you were to assume that even if an Avodah Zara breaks on its own, the owner still believes in it, then that means that even if it's broken pieces, he still believes in the power of these broken pieces. The thing is, that's what's interesting about Avodah Zara. The whole thing is baloney. The whole thing is baloney. So we're talking about what non-Jews believe in. Mm-hmm. So, for us, it makes perfect sense. The whole thing is a joke anyway. So for us, we're thinking, like, if there's any one... how far do you go? So that's the point over here. So again, that's what Shulchan Aruch is saying. If a person finds a broken statue or a broken idol, mamash, so the halach is it's mutter again because of all the different combinations that you can make. Either possibly it was broken on purpose, or even if it was broken by accident. There are shitas that anyway hold that if it's broken by accident, it's mutter. So you put all that together, you could assume mutter. Says the Shulchan Aruch a caveat, which is relatively obvious. Avol what's a tavnis yad a regel. This is only when you're talking about when you find an Avodah Zara that's like a fragment of an Avodah Zara, like a hand or a head or a foot, but it's clearly broken from a larger statue. If you have a hand, foot, or head, wherever the case may be, but it's clearly its own object, it's not like broken off of something else. Like this was a statue of an arm, and this was a statue of a foot. Where then, obviously, that'll be usher if under the conditions that you would have to be concerned about it being Avodah Zara. it's not broken. So it's not the idea that just a limb is mutter. The point is a broken fragment of a statue. That's when it's mutter. As he says, but if you find the form of a hand, a regal or a foot, and it's sitting on its base. In other words, it's a full statue in and of itself. It's just not a full image. It's just the image of a limb. That's going to be also, that's for sure. Okay, that's Sif base. Okay, Sif Gimel. We're going to see these halachas are not super relevant, obviously, for nowadays, but we'll see things that come from this become fundamental. So take a look at Sif Gimel. Sif Gimel is talking about a scenario that I referenced a few weeks ago when we talked about a guy that was walking around with a cross. We talked about that sugya. So the Shulchan Aruch now is talking about a case of where you have a symbol of Avodah Zara, like 100%. This is really something that is served as an Avodah Zara, but it's not standing on its own. It's engraved on vessels and objects. So what's our relationship with those objects? That's what the Shulchan Aruch says like this. Hamaitzi kelim, if you find utensils, vessels, and so on, v'aleim tsurais chama oilavana, and engraved on this object, on this kli, is the image of the sun and the moon. Now it's interesting, right? That this is the language of the Shulchan Aruch, but the Ramah explains that we're not talking about like the circle, like a sun or a moon. Rather, Dahainu, says the Ramah, tsurais hanasim l'shem chama u'lavayna. The source of this is the Rambam himself, that is not talking about the image of a sun or a moon. Rather, we're talking about metaphorical pictures and images that Avodah Zara worshippers would associate with the sun and the moon. So he explains the Hainu again, Tsuras Hanasim L'Shem Cham L'Lavana, certain images that were made to sort of represent the deity of the sun and the moon. K'mai Sha'isam Bale Talismeos, like talismans. They would make these things with certain images that were representative and reflective of what the sun means. Tsuras L'Kichavim, each constellation would sort of have its own image, its own representation. Kigain Tsuras HaMesyachsos L'Shemesh, like certain images that would somehow have a relationship in these people's minds with the sun. The Mitzarim, let's say for the sun, the image was a Melech Me'utar, a king with a crown, sitting with a crown. Yoshev al-Gal, sitting on a carriage, on some sort of chariot. That would be the image of the sun, so to speak. Other types of images for the moon as well. The Yeshlam Tzur Michadis has its own individual tzura. So again, going back, so it says to Shulchan Aruch, if you find a vessel that has within it, that's engraved within it, the image of the sun or the moon, but again, says the Ramah, doesn't mean sun and moon, it means these images, Avodah Zara images that somehow are related to representing the sun and the moon. So says the Shulchan Aruch, those are two examples, sun and the moon, Oy Darkon, or a dragon, V'hu Daimelo Nachash, which is again also in the Gemara of Avodah Zara, it's clear this was a very, very common place of Avodah Zara image, a dragon. A dragon represented something, it was about constellations, it wasn't about, snakes down here. It was just like you have these metaphors for the sun and the moon, metaphors for like the stars was this dragon image. And the Shulchan Aruch goes on to explain specifically what this dragon image was. It looks like a snake. The Yesh Kamin Sampirin, Bein Perak Chulya Shevet Savar, but it has wings like fins, like a fish, coming out of between the scales of its neck. So it's like a dragon fish-like serpent. So he says like this. So what's the halacha? So again, you're finding these images. These are the three examples. Sun, again, representations of the sun, moon, and this dragon-like creature. So you find it on a vessel. So what's halacha? So it says in Shulchan Aruch, Ima kelim mechubadim, if the object that it's engraved on is a mechubed, it's a kavod object, it's something that can be used in an honorable, dignified way, then asur. Then the object is going to become asur. Why? Because you have serious concerns that the object is being served because of the symbol that's engraved on it. Shavadi nasu shem elilim, because then you have to assume that it was made for Avodah Zara. Then mevuzim, however, if the object that it's engraved on is a mevuzadik thing, it's not for a dignified use. So then, even though it has such an image on it, mutarim shlai nasu lenoi, then clearly the symbol would not be seen as a deity symbol. It's more of just decorative. And if it's just decorative, obviously it's not a problem. What's the difference between what are examples of honorable vessels versus non-honorable vessels? Ve'elohim mechubadim. These would be considered to be honorable. Shal ha-shiroyim, something that's found on shiroyim. Now, what is shiroyim? So it's a machlokes rishonim what shiroyim means. One opinion is that shiroyim means dignified clothing, linen, like expensive clothing. If there's an insignia, like something with these three images, that would be an issue. Other rishonim say that no, even if it's fancy clothing are worn, they get sweaty and dirty, that's not going to be considered dignified. Shiroyim mean bracelets. Because you find in Tanakh that the word shiroyim could sometimes mean like a bracelet, sometimes it means fine clothing. So that's a question of what it means. Okay? The zamim are rings, are like earrings. The tabayis, rings on the finger. Those are examples of honorable vessels. Umavuzim, what are considered to be, for sure, non-honorable vessels. So the Shulchan Aruch says yoiros, let's say pots. The kumkumin, smaller, like large pots, small pots. Chamichamin, teapots to heat water. Again, these are things that are used in the kitchen. Clearly, that's you would not have to assume that people are serving these things. Even if it has Avodah Zara image, it's just for decoration. Or for kaisis, or let's say cups, sheshosim, that people drink from. Doesn't matter where the symbol is, if it's on the part of the glass which the water or the drink covers, or if it's higher up on the glass where the water and the liquid's not going to reach that, doesn't make a difference. It's part of a vessel that's used for drinking. It's clearly not bakavidik. Says the Shulchan Aruch, v'kol zeh b'stam. Now again, this is all, I have this object, I found it in a garage sale, whatever it is. I don't know how it was used, I don't know what the intention was, so these are the basic rules. If it's these three images, sun, moon, and a dragon, on bakavidik things, then I have to be concerned. Okay, the calls it a stam. I don't know if it was served, if it was bowed down to. I don't know. So then that's where the qualifications that you go through. Obviously, if I know for certain that I know who made it, and I know who owned it, and I know that it was not used in any way for Avodah Zara, then these things were not served. So that even dignified vessels, even rings and so on would be mutter. Again, the issue is, I don't know if it was served. So then, if it's these images, which are commonplace, symbols of Avodah Zara, on bakavidik vessels, then I have to be concerned. If I know that it wasn't bowed down to, then it's fine. That's the Shulchan Aruch's first opinion. The Yesh Mishaymer, however, those that says the second opinion of the Shulchan Aruch, that there's no distinction for these purposes between dignified vessels, non-dignified vessels. Shekol tzur shin havedes, any symbol, any vessel that you find these symbols on, which are commonplace, Avodah Zara that were extremely common to serve. Bevadai afilu al mavuzin asur. Even if it's on an undignified vessel, it'll still be asur. Again, afal pi she'einu yodim shekim lo nevdu. Again, we're still talking about I don't know, right? Again, if I know for sure it wasn't served, then there's nothing to talk about. But if I don't know, so this second opinion says it doesn't make a difference what type of vessel it is. These three symbols are just so commonplace. The Avodah Zara are so common, you have to be concerned. Ulufizab. So according to this, as the Shulchan Aruch, Bizman Hazeh, in our days, as the Shulchan Aruch, Shemechakikin Chakak Bekelim, that very often you'll find people engrave images in vessels, which are idolatrous images like we saw before. Then there'll be a problem. There'll be a problem if you have these idolatrous symbols in there. Now, okay, that's the Shulchan Aruch. So you have these two opinions. Says the Ramah, "V'haminig kisvar rishayim." The minig is like the first opinion, that there is a distinction between honorable vessels and dishonorable vessels, and that's Allah. Okay. Now, by the way, just a little bit on the side before we go on, just something to think about. The question that a lot of Mefarshim deal with is that, again, the basic concern is that you have this Avodah Zara symbol engraved or somehow connected with this vessel, and the concern is that the thing was served. The question is like this: what does it mean? Again, you have to get into like the guy's head exactly. Are they serving the ring, or is the ring just seen as sort of just a piece of paper, so to speak, to allow the image to be there, and you're serving the image? You know what I'm saying? Is it as if do they see the image as sort of just a statue that's just connected to a ring? Or no, it's a ring. It's just that now the ring has divine qualities to it because of the symbolic image that's engraved within it. That's the question. Now, the nafkamin is, in fact, something that the Shach brings down. You can see it inside. The question that the Mefarshim deal with is that is this halacha only true when the image is coming out of the vessel, or if it's boiled, or does it even if it's engraved within it, right? If you hold that that the image is not seen as like a statue or something that exists on its own, connected to a pot, it's the pot. Just this pot is now considered to be a deity in your mind because of the image that's engraved on it. Well, then there's no reason to think that the image has to be sticking out. It's about the pot. If you hold, however, that no, what they're serving is the image, like that, like see it as if it's its own little statue, just connected to whatever it is, and just if it's connected to something muvazadik, they're not going to serve it. Then you could definitely make the argument that the thing has to stick out, not being engraved in. So that's the question the first deal with. But again, that's the case. Again, so far that's not super relevant, I guess, unless you go to a garage sale. But as we'll see like this, says the Ramah, again, so the Ramah just told us the minig is like the first opinion, which is, again, basic rules. I don't know what happened with this kli, I don't know, but I know that there's a commonplace image of Avodah Zara engraved on it or sticking out of it, whatever it is. And so then the Shulchan Aruch said, if it's a bakavadika vessel, you have to be machmer, and maybe it was served. If it's not a bakavadika thing, nothing to worry about. Says the Ramah continues, Ubizman hazeh. Now nowadays, she'ein hagayim oivdin l'tzuras halala, that these images are no longer served anymore. So mutar, no, then it should be completely fine. Imatzin, if you find such an object anywhere, because again, the whole thing is because you're concerned with being served. Nowadays, even though in times of the Gemara, and maybe in the Shulchan, the Shulchan is just recording what it says in the Gemara. In times of the Gemara, these were the most commonplace of Avodah Zaras, right? But it says Ramah, nowadays they're not being used. So in other words, you could sort of know that it wasn't served. Says the Ramah, therefore it would be mutter to have it bana. Aval ein lahash oisam. But says the Ramah, interesting. However, Maris ayin purposes that there still would be, because someone watching you do this might not chap that you're relying on the fact that it's not so commonly served anymore. They might get confused between that and things that are legitimately still served as Avodah Zara and think that they're also mutter bana. Because of that concern, Maris ayin, just don't keep these things in your home, even though technically speaking, it's probably mutter because it's most likely not served, but just Maris ayin, it's not good. Again, not Maris ayin that we think you're serving the Avodah Zara. That's not the concern. Maris ayin is that other people might think that this object was served as an Avodah Zara, since it is, at least it used to be, a commonplace symbol, and therefore they might see you as someone that's deriving benefit from Avodah Zara. That's the Maris ayin issue. Okay. The Yesh Machmirim, now says the Ramah, it's interesting, the Yesh Machmirim, there are those that are Machmir, but Kol Hatzuras HaNaskaris, even nowadays, with these images, Afilu Bizman Hazeh. Afal Gav Diadin Lo Yipalchilu, even though we know they're not being served, there are those that are Machmir to consider them Mamish, Asr Ba'ana, not just because Marasayin, but Mamish, Asr Ba'ana, even nowadays. That's the Shlita, this Shlita Ramah just finally brings down. Happens to be the Shach, goes on a whole, in Sif Yud Zayin, has a whole arichas, basically to just say tzarchin on that shit, like why in the world would you be machmer like that? I mean, even in the Shulchan Aruch, which was from the times of the Gemara, it says that if you know the vessel's not served, there's nothing to worry about. So now we know the vessel's not served. I mean, so it's very difficult to understand what the pshat in this yesh machmirim is. So practically speaking, the Achrayim usually disregard that shita, and they go with what the Ramah just said, which is that nowadays these things are not being served. So practically speaking, technically speaking, there's not much to be worried about. But Maris ayin, that there is. Again, not Maris ayin that you're serving of Avodah Zara, that is not a concern about. Maris ayin that other people, that people might think that this was served by who knows what, or they'll just get confused between this symbol of Avodah Zara and a real Avodah Zara, which is served nowadays. It'll just be confusing, so avoid the whole thing. That's what the Ramah says. And he finally ends off, Vitzuras Darkon. Now, one of the images that we saw, right, of the three, was this dragon sea creature type of thing, which again was commonplace, very common. So says the Shulchan Aruch, Tzuras Darkon, to this image. If you want to make a statue, you want to just tell me. You're in school for what do they call it? Huh? For art, you're like in art, yeah.
Painting.
So you have the painting, or we'll see painting, maybe even sculptor. So you want to sculpt a statue, so you want to make a dragon, whatever it is. So it says the Shulchan Aruch mutar l'saisa, you're allowed to make such a thing. We'll see soon what the issue would be. Again, there's no intention of this, you like the way it looks. So it's mutter to make it. But again, maris ayin there will be maris ayin. Again, not maris ayin that people will think you're serving Avodah Zara, but maris ayin in terms of people see this dragon in your home that used to be an Avodah Zara image. They're going to think that this thing was served at some point by someone, and you're keeping it in your home. What is a from Jew doing with an Avodah Zara in their house? Not that we think that you're serving Avodah Zara, but pasnish, that a Jew should have an Avodah Zara in their home. Now, little do they know that you made it and there's no Avodah Zara, but it's one of those images which is just so commonplace as Avodah Zara historically. It's just Marasayan avoided.
This last line is total chiddush, totally different than the rest of the.
Yeah, it's sort of leading the way into Sif Dalet, because what he's introducing now, what the Ramah just introduced us to, is at least a concept that there might be some statues that one is forbidden to make. A dragon is not one of them, but it sounds like there is, like, what's the issue? So this is what we're going to see now in Sif Dalet. Now this is a sugya that we're not going to be able to cover all of it today. It's a fascinating topic. I mean, it gets to practically, like, there's a lot of, this is finally where there's some, like, halach l'maisa sort of in Avodah Zara, where, like, in the early Paiskim they talked about this, like, having dolls. You know, we're going to see certain images, like certain statues you're not allowed to make or own. So what falls into that, what not? There was a famous, like, a lot of early Paiskim would, like, you know, crack the nose of a doll. Maybe you've seen that, or have you heard of such a thing? We'll go through that. But the idea is coming as follows. If you take a look at the Marmakaimis, so let's go to Marmakah number 3. Okay, so this is a pasuk. It's actually it's not this is Parsha. Look at that. So it was not on purpose. So Marmakah number 3, the end of Parshas Yisrael. So after that, there's a difference in everything. So it says in pasuk, "V'yamar Hashem al Moshe." Hashem says to Moshe, "Kai Saimra b'nei Yisrael." So say to the Jewish people, "Atem re'isim." Yeah, from Har Sinai you saw. Kimin Hashemayim diparti machem, that I Hashem spoke to you from heaven, meaning me alone. There was no, and you didn't see anything else. Loisasun iti eloi kesef v'lohei zav loisasu lechem, and you should not make iti. You should not make with me gods of gold and silver and gold. Don't make for yourself. So the question that the Gemara of Avodah Zara deals with is, what does it mean? Listen, there's two questions. First of all, in that source of Dibris, it already tells you not to have Avodah Zara. So exactly what's being added by this. And number 2, what does it mean, L'sasun iti, don't make with me? What does it mean, with me? So Rashi brings down on Chumash what the Gemara darshans. The Gemara says like this, L'sasun, this is a special prohibition, not about Avodah Zara. You're not serving these images. But it's just there's an isser of making certain images, even if it's not Avodah Zara purposes. L'sasun demus shamshi, don't make images of those that serve me up high. In other words, says Rabbanu Shalom, I have certain servants in the higher world, namely sun, moon, constellations, malachim, things like this. Well, we'll see that. Well, dragon not, because dragon is not doesn't exist.
It's in the same.
No, so that's what the Shulchan Aruch is saying. There's no problem making a dragon. We'll see. But anyway, it says what Rashi, what the Gemara is saying is, like Sasun Iti, don't make images and statues of objects or representatives of objects that serve me in the higher world. Higher world being spiritual, like malachim, or even physically, the sun, the moon, and so on. So with that background, take a look at the Shulchan Aruch and Sif Dalet. Again, this is not about you're not serving it. This is just to make it because of art. It says the Shulchan Aruch like this: Asul etzayer tzuros shemudar shchina. One is forbidden from making images. We're going to see again the details. Is it 2-dimensional, 3-dimensional? How much of the image that we're going to see as Hashem later, but not for tonight. But it says in Shulchan Aruch, one is not allowed to make images of things that exist in the realm of the Shechina. What does that mean? Keep going. Dalet panim b'had yadadi, like an image of malachim. What does a malach look like? So in Sefer Yecheskel, it talks about malachim that have 4 faces. 4 faces: one human, one lion, one eagle, one ox, different faces. So if you make with wings and so on, if you somehow make a statue copying the description in Sefer Yechezkel, that's going to be a problem. Even though whatever copy you're making is obviously not going to be to size, and it's not going to be exactly. Obviously, it's not the same thing, but if it's representative of that, that's going to be a problem. The Chaintzur Srafim, Vaifanim, Malach Yashar, so any types of malachim that are described in Sukkim, you follow the description, that's going to be a problem. So that's number one example. V'chein tzuras adam levadli, so too a human, a picture of an adam. That's also going to be a problem. Why? Because also in Sefer Yechezkel it describes a vision that Yechezkel had of an adam sitting on a throne as reflecting Hashem kiviyachol. So it's the same thing. So the human image is going to be a problem again because of this prohibition of leisasun iti. See, that's what he says. Kol elu asur lasaisam. Says the Shulchan Aruch, all these things are asur to make. Afilu linoi, even if it's made for decoration, it's not for anything else. Now, fine, so far. Now, if let's say someone else makes it for you, and you happen to want to buy it, or you receive it as a present, technically speaking, the pasuk said, "Loisasum iti," don't make it. So it's a prohibition of making it. Says the Shulchan Aruch, "Im goy asum lai." However, if a guy made it for you, asur lahashaisam, you are not allowed to keep it because of marasayim. Now, what's interesting is as follows. This is what we're going to see now. What exactly is the issue of marasayim over here? What is the issue of marasayim? So if you take a look at the Taz in Sif Tes, okay, so the Taz in Sif Tes, this is not just the Taz, it's just he's recording it simply, but this is something that goes back to the earlier sources. The marasayim over here, I could have thought of a number of different options of what the marasayim would be about, but the Taz is like this. Bizeh, when it comes to this marasayim, again, the image of a human being, malachim, v'chulu, everything that falls in the category of l'sasaniti, says the Taz, B'zeh hatam mishum chshad. What's the marasayim? She'achshadu she'oived lehem. Chshad is, the marasayim is, that people will think that you're taka serving this statue. That's what he says. So here's where it gets a little bit funny. So far we learned about two different categories of statues, different halachas. We had one category of statues and images, I should say, in Sif Gimel, which were three images that were the most commonplace avodah zaras, right? Which were this, picture representing the sun, some sort of picture representing the moon, and a sea creature of a dragon. These were the most commonplace avodah zaras. So much so that if you find them even just engraved on a pot, there's a shiloh whether the pot was served. That's how commonplace and that's how connected people were to these avodah zaras. And we saw from the Ramah that even in situations where, technically speaking, you don't have to be worried about this actually being once upon a time served, but there's still marasayim owning it. What was the marasayim? Not that you would actually serve the avodah zara, but that once upon a time it was served, or maybe people just get confused that you're a Jew that has an avodah zara in their home, whatever. But again, what we see is, let's say you have a pot which has a human engraving on it, not a problem. Let's say you have a pot that has an engraving of a malach on it, not a problem. Why? Not so commonplace of avodah zaras. Not so commonplace of avodah zaras. Okay. And then you have the next halach in Sif Daled, which was a different category. These are images, statues that you're not allowed to make because of leisasunit. Fine. And that's a special gzeras hakasav, only things that are serving Hashem and Shemayim. Yeah, humanoid figure, malachim, I get it. But then the Shulchan Aruch told us, oh, by the way, there's also marasayim with these statues. And what's the marasayim here? That you might be serving about this, that you actually might serve these things. So here's the question. I don't get it. You're telling me that these images are not as commonly served as a dragon and as the metaphor of the sun and the moon, right? And that's why if you find these images engraved on a pot, there's no concern at all. But yet, if I have it in my house, you're gonna be chayshid that I actually serve the avodah zara, that I'm serving these things. So, like, which one is it? When it comes to a dragon, which you tell me is the most commonplace of avodah zara, that people are so makushev, people are so like crazy about these images that they're willing to serve a pot that has the image on it. But but I'm not going to be chayshid a yid to serve avodah zara. But yet you'll be chayshid me to serve these other images that are not as commonly served as avodah zara. It's like, well, which one is it? It doesn't make any sense. If you want to tell me that there's that the marasayim over here by the malach was that maybe people think that I made the statue myself, I hear that. That's not what the Taz says. And and it's not, again, he's not making this up. Let's go back to earlier sources, right? No one's gonna think that you're the master sculptor that you can make this thing, right? The Mara sign is that maybe you're talking in the middle of the night after a minyan, you go home and you're bowing down to this getchka. Really? That's what you're worried about. But you're not worried about me bowing down to a dragon and bowing down to the symbol of the sun and the moon, which everyone is mamash Shom Kusha, and Shom Kusha, the whole world thinks of that as mamash Avodah Zara, to such a degree that they love those images so much that they want to bow down to a pot that has the image on it. So that you're not worried about. But you're worried about the Malach image, like what's going on? It's very strange. Very, very strange. The question of Achronim ask. Again, keep them Marasai consistent, but why? Like, the more common served objects, you're less worried about me actually being one of the followers of that. But the less commonly served Avodah Zara, that's what you're worried about me serving. Why? First of all, I would say, why would you ever be chesed from Yid serving Avodah Zara b'chalal? Why there should be Marasai on that? But if you are, for whatever reason, if we're concerned about people looking at you as mamish an Avodah Zara, secretly, then I would think that would be more, people would be more inclined to do that with images that are more commonly served as Avodah Zara. It's a little bit funny.
Yeah, so this Taz is going on like the images of of a malach.
Yeah. Exclusively.
Right.
Just that.
Can one say because these are things that a Yid is kosher to. These are things that a Yid is like. So these other things are like to a Yid it's like
completely alien.
Dragon.
Completely
Who cares
alien.
about this whole thing?
Right.
A malach though it's. So
it is true that yes, a malach is a entity that our religion acknowledges.
What?
But again, Avodah Zara is a very strong. That's a strong claim for from Yid. Even if it's so much so that large segments of Klal Yisrael have an issue with like davening by a kever and tzaddik because it might seem like So you're talking about a from Yid, and we're concerned that he's literally bowing to the statue of Rifal, of Michal, like that. That takes a lot of guts to be able to say that. So again, that's what the Achronim point out is like, if you're going to go that far, then probably it's it's like this. Anyway, the guy that's thinking that about another Yid he's doing something wrong. Like no one should be thinking that about another Yid. But if you are, like and you're thinking that's good, you're looking for reasons to label that guy as a no goodnik. Mistam, the most common of other zars would be the most,
They're out of style. They're anachronistic. That's what the Ramah said, right?
No, that's the Ramah. But this is in the Shulchan Aruch, right? So this is going back already in the times of the Gemara. This is not. You're right. In modern days, maybe you can make such a distinction. Those are not chashuv anymore. But in the Gemara, this is the distinction. These Marasayans is right from the Gemara. It's right from the Gemara.
Can you say that just procedure-wise? They couldn't make a gezerah of Ma'asayin on something that was just never going to happen because it's not common. So they went so far to say, we make a takana, it's more like a takana, right? That as a gather,
yeah.
Right? It's all as a gather to keep them away from it. So they're going to say, you may do it.
Dafka by the Malach images because we're afraid of ultimately. So, it's
both to keep them away from it. Just in one place, it's common. So
right.
If you said, "Hey, there's a gezerah there," they'll understand it. And then the other place, they're like, "What are you talking about? Why is there a gezerah on something that's never going to happen? Nobody has thought about in 100 years." So instead, they made a takana, which is people are really going to do it, when maybe they weren't.
Do what? Make the statue.
Right, a real shot, a real takana that they're going to din avodah zara. Just
actual Avodah Zara or just make the statue, like Mamash Avodah Zara. Yeah. Okay, so then why only by the Malach and?
I'm saying because otherwise it wouldn't be a real gather. Does that make sense? Like procedure-wise.
It wouldn't be a real gather. Why not?
Because if you make a gather on something that nobody understands.
I would say that what's more understandable in terms of like concerns of people being chayshid each other. Like I would think that it's more likely one Jew is going to be chayshid another Jew, not of actually serving Avodah Zara, but of having an Avodah Zara in their home because they're into collector's items. Like that's what I would think is more reasonable than to think he's a secret worshiper of that cult. Let's say he's just he's a collector of these things, and it's like, come on, what are you doing with Avodah Zara in your home? Which is what we're saying when it comes to the dragon symbols, right? That's what we're concerned about. That the guys are saying, what are you doing from you collecting Avodah Zaras in your home? And I'm not thinking that you're serving it, but all of a sudden when it comes to the Malach thing, we are. Okay, so take a look at the Marmukah number 1. Ultimately, it has to do with understanding why is it that the Rabban Shalom doesn't want us to have. Forget about this again. Leisasuniti. Why are you not allowed to make these images? Again, the pasuk says not. But what's the Havana of it? So take a look at the Rambam. Okay, there's a Rambam in Hilchos Avodah Zara, and it's interesting because sometimes the Rambam in Sefer Mitzvahs will give you sometimes an explanation, a reason for a mitzvah, although that's not his focus there either, but sometimes. But in Halachas, in Mishnah Torah, he'll never talk about the reason unless it's necessary for some practical halachas that become understandable because of it. This is what Rambam writes, Hilchos Avodah Zara Perechas, Halacha Zayin. Asur la'asais tzuras l'nei. There are certain images that you're not allowed to make even for decoration. Even though it's not for Avodah Zara. Shenemar, pasuk says, Lo sasaniti, eloi kesef, v'lo hizav. Right, you're not allowed to make these images. Kolaimar, tzuros shel kesef v'zav shein l'noi. Certain images, which again, in the next halacha he explains what they are: humanoid figure, malachim, and so on. You're not allowed to make them even for no, even for beauty and so on. Why? Kedei shalayitu ben hatayin v'yid mushen lavoda. The reason why the Torah made this prohibition is in order to make sure that no Jew is ever nechshad, is ever being looked at as maybe he's serving Avodah Zara. In other words, says the Rambam, the reason why very often when we think of gzeiras and takanas in Rabbanan, but by Deraisis, whatever the Torah says, it's for its own, it's inherent. It's not because of a concern of X, Y, Z. Says the Rambam in this case, no. The reason why the Rebbeinu Shalom made this halacha, that you're not allowed to make these statues, even if it's not for Avodah Zara, is because the Rebbeinu Shalom is concerned that if you make these statues, people will look at you and say, you're serving Avodah Zara. They're going to be chayshid you of Avodah Zara.
Like the tas.
Like the tas. Says the Rambam in Sefer Mitzvahs is even more explicit. In let's say dollars, Zelshane, Sheziranu Me'asais Tzurais Balichaim. Now, Eitzim Vavonim, Vametachas, we're not allowed to make certain images of living creatures, Malachim, a human being, and so on, from any material. Vizulasam. Vav Bishla Yasulei of it. Again, you're not making it to serve. This is a harchaka, this is a gzeira from the Torah. Me'asais Tzurais Klal for making these images. Kedei Shla Yachshav Behen Mashi Yichshav Asichlim, in order to avoid being thought of as idiots think, that Avodah Zara nickers think that these objects have power, to avoid being thought of as one of those people. The Torah says don't make these objects. It's a chiddush. So this is unique. That the whole reason why these images are usher to make is taka because of the gzeira, because the Rebbeinu Shalom doesn't want you to be looked at by someone else, and the person is going to say, you're an Ovid of Avodah Zara. So once we understand that that's what the Derais is, so now when the Chachamim are coming, now it's a Chiddush. The Chachamim, B'derech Klal, come and to sort of complete the picture of what the mitzvah is about on a Derais level. Usually when they come to complete it, the completion, the finishing touches they do, is about making Gedarim, about making fences, don't eat chicken and milk, because you might come to eat meat and milk. And that's how Chazal come and sort of wrap up in a nice bow, Basav V'Chalav. But over here, what I think we can say is that Chacham are also coming to complete this mitzvah of Lesasuniti. By what? By expanding the territory of this chshad that the Torah was concerned about. Because the Torah is concerned that the Torah doesn't want you to be looked at by anyone else as, God forbid, someone that does Avodah Zara. So what does the Rebbeinu Shalom say? The Rebbeinu Shalom says, therefore, don't make the image of a malach. Don't make the image of a human being. The Torah, that's where the Torah ends. And the Chachamim are saying, we're just expanding that territory and finishing touches, which is, not only should you not make these things, but don't own these things. For the same reason that the Torah said, don't make it, which is, people might look at you as an Avodah Zara, as a Baal Avodah Zara. So we ask the question, why is it that all of a sudden, like out of nowhere, Chazal are worried about Maras Ayin when it comes to these images, that that people might think that you're serving Avodah Zara. When it comes to the dragon and those other things, they're not concerned about that. The answer is, you're right. The Chacham on their own would never have been concerned about a Jew being looked at as an idol worshiper. But the reason why the Chachamim are concerned about that when it comes to these specific images of a malach and a human is because they're just following what the Torah started. And for whatever reason, the Torah was concerned specifically about these images in terms of a Jew being looked at as an Ovid Avodah Zara. And so the Chacham are saying, listen, don't ask us Kakasha. You're asking us why are we concerned about here and not anywhere else? You're asking us. That's the Gzeres HaKasav, that for some reason these images, that's where the Rebbeinu Shalom is heavily concerned about cheshad of a Jew being looked at, even by a crazy guy, as an Ovid Avodah Zara. And so the Chacham are coming and finishing that up. Not so much by making like a Gzeira per se, but like a Takam, just expanding and sort of, rounding the edges of this thing, that the cheshad that Rebbeinu Shalom is concerned with, we can see that once the Torah opened that door and said that yes, this is a legitimate concern, that with these images, it's a legitimate concern for a Jew to be looked at as an Ovid Avodah Zara. So then the Chacham say, okay, now once that clicks, once we are now given that basic assumption that for whatever reason these images, there's taka legitimate concern to be looked at as an Ovid Avodah Zara, then it goes, okay, so now we're going to come in and finish the job. Because if that's true, you could ask us why that's true, but if that's true, because that's what the Torah said, then it makes sense to us to be worried about that, not just by making it, but also by owning it as well. And that's what's going on. Once you move to these other images of a dragon and symbols of sun and moon, then we were not told by the Torah that we have to be concerned about a Jew being looked at like someone that worships these things. Then we'll go with our own human ideas, which is that's not really a concern for us. The concern we would have is that someone might think that that Jew is just owning Avodah Zara, not actually serving it. So the Marasayan over there is different. So that's what's going on over here. Okay, so now the question is now thrown back on God, right? Why are these images two things? The Rebbeinu Shalom is not worried about Marasayan for Basa B'chalav, right? If the Hashem was worried about Marasayan for Basa B'chalav, he would have asked for coconut milk too, right? So Hashem's not worried about Marasayan anywhere except for here. Okay, Aleph, why? Why by Avodah Zara are you only worried about Marasayan? Dafki here by Avodah Zara. Number two, of all the images of Avodah Zara, these three things, these things, the humanoid figure, Malachim, why Dafki these things? Okay, so I think the way to think of it is as follows. Let's very quickly, very simply, it's already late. What's Marasayan about? What do you get to the kishkas of it? What exactly is Marasayan about? What's the cheshad? So let's say someone thinks of me like I'm a shagins. No, I have thick skin. I don't care. Let them think what they think. Like, why am I worried? So you could say, well, maybe they'll learn from you. So that's true maybe when it comes to like things that people might actually make a mistake. No, it's unlikely to say that people are going to learn, Taka, but there's mutter, I guess. Because they see a guy that they think that they're accusing of serving Avodah Zara. Avodah Zara is so basic in Chumash that it's aser. It's very unlikely for anyone to be concerned that people are going to learn Avodah Zara's mutter because they think someone's doing it. Like it's unlikely. So then what exactly is the concern of Marasayan over here? That people are going to learn the mistake that Avodah Zara's mutter? Like I said, unlikely. So what's Marasayan? The answer is, it's not lefi kvoidai. It's not lefi the kavod of a Jew to be looked at as someone that serves Avodah Zara. That's the point of Marasayan. It's there's a certain inyan of kavod Yisrael. Kavod Yisrael. Certain dignity that you have to have as a yid. That you have to, and it's something you can be meichel. There's certain things you can be meichel in your kavod. Yeah, you can be meichel, whatever. Yeah. Pass me a tissue. Nah, I'm not. You shake it, and I'm passing you a tissue. Okay, I'm meichel. I don't care, whatever. But the Rebbeinu Shalom says there are certain aspects of your kavod that are not up to you to be meichel. And that to you walking around or doing certain things that is going to cause people to think that you're an Ovid of Avodah Zara, that's being poigim in a certain aspect of your kavod that you don't have the right to be meichel on. Why? The deepest kavod of a yid, where's ultimately a person's kavod come from? As a yid. So you could do certain things that make you honorable, you could accomplish certain things. But in the deepest senses, the most honorable, the dignified aspect of who you are is as the pasuk says, "Bonim atem l'Hashem Elokeichem," is that you have within you a chelek elokam al mamash. The essence of the neshama, that's ultimately the source of your covenant, of your dignity. And because the source of your dignity is the fact that you are a child kaviyachal of the Rebbeinu Shalom, and you have within you a piece of the divine presence, that's not something that you can be meichel, nor should you be meichel on. And that is something that's bound with amunah. That's where your amunah comes from. See, there's many mitzvahs that are sort of like derivatives of who you are, be'etzem. And then there are certain inyanim which are touching the very core of who you are. Amunah versus Avodah Zara, that touches the essence of who a person, of who a yid is. A yid is a man. The first Jew, which is Avram Avinu, establishes the essence of Nishmas Yisrael in the world, and he is the first. He's Rosh L'Mamina, because where does Amunah come from? As I've mentioned many times, Amunah does not come from a particular education. It doesn't come from a particular proof. Amunah comes from within, and it comes from the deepest place of who you are. The source of your kavod is the source of your Amunah. Therefore, Davka the Rebbeinu Shalom is going to be makbid about the kavod of a yid, specifically when it comes to Avodah Zara. The Rebbeinu Shalom is not going to say that it's that I'm going to be worried about. The Rebbeinu Shalom says, I'm not going out of my way to be worried about chshad and maras ayin when it comes to bas b'chalav. Why? Because as amazing, as important as bas b'chalav is, it's not touching the very core of who you are, where your kavod comes from. But when it comes to Amunah and Avodah Zara, that's touching the very essence of who you are, which is where the source of your kavod comes from, that you don't have power over to be meichel. It's the very essence of who you are. And the essence of who you are, where is your Amunah comes from, is the fact that that there's a piece of me inside of you. You can't be meichel that. Once we understand that's the concept of what the Rebbeinu Shalom is makbid on, Davka over here with Avodah Zara, which is the chshad, because the people calling you and thinking of you as an Ovid of Avodah Zara, it's being poikim, it's touching that very core. Therefore, it's Davka these images. Why? The context of the Pesukim in Parshas Yisro in Marmuk number 3 was interesting, right? The Rebbeinu Shalom didn't just say like Vaydaber Shel Moshe Lemar, don't make these images. It's over the whole introduction. Hashem said to Moshe that you saw by our Sinai that I spoke to you and no one else did. Now don't make these images. What's the connection? So Marmuk number 4, the Siparno. The Siparno explains as follows: that there's something unique to these images, and this is something this is what the Siparno is explaining, is that it sort of flows from the previous pasuk as follows: that these images are not just images that were just stam worshipped. These are images. There's two types of Avodah Zaras. There's Avodah Zara which are seen as, okay, God's over there, no shaykhs to God. We're now creating a new God. It's just a new system, a system of an idolatrous system, or which is really what Moshe was referring to before, suggesting before. Or you could have, no, I believe in God, but I don't believe that I'm able to interact with that God. I create an intermediary. The Siparno says as follows: don't make these images. Why? Because these images are unique. Once you saw in Har Sinai, says the Rebbeinu Shalom, that I spoke to you directly, and I was willing to talk to you, and I didn't need to have somewhere in between be a translator for us. And why? Because why is it that I was able to speak directly? Because there's a part of me inside of you. Therefore, says Rebbeinu Shalom, don't make these images, because what's unique to these images is that, you could have people just serving these images stam as a Avodah Zara, not thinking about the, Yudke Vavke or anything like that. But in the Torah's world, these images are unique, is that these would be the perfect intermediaries. The Rebbeinu Shalom anyway uses them. Malachim, the sun and the moon, the humanoid figure, Tzelem Elokim. These are things that we could associate with being those in Tzoyim. And that's what this Isser is about. So let's clarify to refine the concern more. Once you have the Siparno and the Rambam, then really what we're having is as follows. The Rebbeinu Shalom is saying, this Inyan, I am extra makbid about Maras Ayin, that no one should think of you as serving Avodah Zara, but what type of Avodah Zara in particular? In Avodah Zara that's about an intermediary. Why? Because again, the whole inyan of yours is revolving around the kavod of a Jew. And the kavod of a Jew comes from knowing that inside of you is a piece of the divine presence. And that concept would undermine the need of having an intermediary. mean, the very idea, the very idea of having an intermediary is going against your source of covet. It's going against this idea that you have inside of you a piece of the divine presence. If you believed that you had inside of you a piece of the divine presence, then you don't need an intermediary. You don't need an intermediary. And so the very fact that the core of this mitzvah is revolving around the Rebbeinu Shalom being makbid on your covet. And the source of your covet is going to be connected to Amunah, but specifically Amunah in that you don't need an intermediary. Because it's one thing to say, listen, I don't need an intermediary, I'm just, but also on the side, I like to fool around with other gods. But it's one thing talking to Rebbeinu Shalom and saying, but I can't face him. Because I need an intermediary. Believing in the need of an intermediary is mamish going against the covet of Yid. And that's what the mitzvah is about. The mitzvah is don't make these things because the Rebbeinu Shalom is hyper-focused and concerned about your own covet. Because that's what an intermediary would be reflective of. So you need an intermediary because you don't have that covet inside of you telling you that you can face the Rebbeinu Shalom. So that's what the side is over here. So again, going back, the reason why Chazal are going to be willing to be worried about Mar Sign that you're serving Avodah Zara is because they're following the Torah. And the reason why the Torah is concerned with Mar Sign over here, Dafka, with these images, is because that's the side of these images. These images would be symbolic of a Jew not believing in their own covet, not believing that they are worthy of engaging in the Rebbeinu Shalom directly. And that's what these images represent. That's what they represent. And so any time that you even make or own these images through Chazal's extension, that would cause anyone else to look at you in a disrespectful way, that's part of this whole inyan of this mitzvah, which is having covet. Having covet within yourself to know that you can face God, and having covet that no one else should be plugging in your covet, because that's disrespectful to you. To have the dignity to feel proud enough to be upset that anyone, not to be looked at like that, not to be looked like a shmata. That's the end of this mitzvah. So it's covet. It's the covet of Yid, and that's ultimately the source of covet. The covet of Yid ultimately is sourced in this idea that you have a piece of the divine presence inside of you, which legitimizes your existence and legitimizes your right to speak to the Rebbeinu Shalom directly. And anything that's going to be plaguing in that covet, the Rebbeinu Shalom is makbid on this mitzvah sasaniti. That's the aside. But Hashem, next week we're going to go more into this halachas in a more practical sense, in terms of like the guidelines, what images we're allowed to own, owning, all the things that come from it. Even kids' arts, making the sun and the moon, pictures like this. What's the deal? So as Hashem we'll go through it. Okay.
In Gimel, it sounded like the Mechaber was saying that. It sounded like we're good. That's a lot.
Yeah, it sounded
like the Mechaber was saying that if there's no chashash